Hey everyone, McGee here. It's been a while since I've done a post-draft analysis of one of my teams, but with the introduction of the ZA Megas and now having had a few opportunities to draft a few of them, this is one team I'm really excited to talk about. It's for the Clodsire Premiere League, which I've been participating in for quite a few seasons now. So I am participating in both their legacy and their standard league. I'm going to talk about the standard one today just because the draft format's a little more typical, and I think it's better suited for this type of post-draft analysis just because of how it's set up. So today I'm going to dive into my team only. I know there's a Clodcast coming out soon that's going to do a whole analysis for all the Clodsire teams, so I'm not trying to step on that. Just want to talk about my team because I'm pretty excited about what came together in the end. And so I want to talk about my strategy and what I was angling for with this team. Those that were following the draft will know that I overhauled a lot of it in the post process, which is fine in the end. I had a plan to center around my new Mega. It didn't work out during that draft, and so I reconfigured, and I'm quite happy with the results of that. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So I'm going to give a breakdown of the kind of the mon by mon structure of how I was building this out in the grace period, and then we'll do an overall team comp and kind of a uh, a discussion on what I'm trying to do with this team this season, and hopefully, by the end of it, some of it's panned out the way I'm hoping. So we'll start by talking about the new Mega, since that's going to be the centerpiece of the team. That's Mega Meganium, who we was only like 14 or so points in the draft, but I pulled early, took her in round one because I think she's a really cool Mega. I think she does a lot of really cool things. I've been a I've been a Meganium fan for a very, very long time. Very difficult Pokemon to use in gameplay, just because picking a grass starter when you have to deal with a flying and a bug gym right off the bat is never any fun. But for those Meganium loyalists like myself, Mega Soul was such a fun ability for her, so I'm really excited to talk about her and what I'm trying to do with her on my team. So obviously she got a huge boost to her special attack stat, like plus 60, and some additional bulk on alongside what was already some respectable defensive stats, and then the addition of a fairy typing, all very positive. And then the Mega Soul obviously is the big one with the full, fire powered weather ball, one turn solar beam, 2/3 recovery with synthesis, and then it dishes with dazzling gleam and earth power for great coverage. She's just a really good hard hitter now. Doesn't really have a way to boost that special attack stat, but 143 is very respectable, especially when it's going to oftentimes be able to run modest, since an 80 speed stat doesn't generally get that full investment for a lot of her matchups. So really, I'm just trying to angle around how do I maximize her, and so she's a really hard Pokemon to switch into unless you have like a Blissey or a Clod, ironically a Clodsire on your team. It's not an easy Pokemon to switch into. You guessed wrong. You take a Solar Beam or a Weather Ball or an Earth Power or a Dazzling Gleam. Most things are going to find themselves being two-hit KO'd just because of the intense power of the Solar Beam. So if you can resist that, if you're a Poison or a Steel type, you're not doing too well with the Earth Powers or the Weather Balls. So it's just a very dangerous Pokemon if it has good predictive guesses on what's going to try to come in defensively on it. And so I'm trying to synergize with team momentum here, gain entry as often and safely as possible. So I'm trying to draft around this Meganium, draft around it a good pivot team, which is typical for me in general. I like having a lot of reliable pivoters. But a lot of reliable pivoters that can force opponents into predictable switch outs, which creates free entry for Mega Meganium to come in and just blast whatever on the field. It does really well against a lot of standard defensive pieces. You think like a Ferrothorn's not going to handle the Weather Balls. Toxapec's not liking the Solar Beam or the Earth Powers, even though it has that Poison typing. Clefable can withstand to a degree some of that attack, but Solar Beam at full power, Clefable's struggling against. And so outside of really, really strong specially defensive Pokemon, it's not an easy one to switch in on. So it can really abuse some of the typical bulk pieces, and then with just enough speed to outspeed some of those mid-speed ones if it wants to play that game as well. Obviously, the problem with Mega Meganium that I'm expecting to run into this season is that, yes, it's dangerous, yes, it's powerful, but her move pool overall is pretty limited. You're going to expect to see Weather Ball and Solar Beam and Synthesis probably as 3 of the 4 moves in almost every matchup. And so that leaves one spot for additional coverage with like a Dazzling Gleam or an Earth Power, or maybe a substitute if you're feeling you could get those opportunities. If I feel I can get those opportunities in a matchup. So trying to be creative with her may be a challenge. She may not need it. Some Pokemon are just so powerful hitting that they don't really need a lot of variety, and they're just fine as is. But certainly that will lead to her being abused. I could see Assault Vests on some Pokemon that can slot a poison move being dangerous because I can't get the KO I was expecting to get, or running into issues of berries. Maybe a Rindo Berry. I think that's the grass berry, or Shuka berries that are well timed, maybe an Aka berry for like a steel matchup, and then I'm taking back those super effective hits from poison or steel or flying, and so even though she has good bulk, she can find herself in trouble pretty quickly if Pokemon are tankier than I'm expecting, and so trying to find ways to be creative with her within the confines of a limited but powerful move pool will certainly create challenges, but there should be plenty of opportunities with her to get her on the field safely, and so I'm excited to talk about how I'm going to try to optimize her play. So the next Pokemon up is Palafin, who I am very excited about using as well. I really haven't drafted him that much in Generation 9. I struggle with just getting a single typing out of him, and at that cost, I tend to avoid Pokemon like that, but Palafin really works nicely with Mega Meganium. Pressures very well the fire types that might get to her pretty well against most physical ice types. Some of the special ones with the freeze dry, obviously not so much. And then having that priority and that pivot, also really great options because, again, Mega Meganium is not fast, and Mega Meganium doesn't want to eat, even though it has bulk, it doesn't want to eat unnecessary attacks. Grass Fairy is not a very strong defensive typing, and so she doesn't resist a whole bunch. And so I want to make sure that I'm drafting Pokemon that force predictive switch outs where she can get it on. And Palafin obviously tends to struggle heavily with the bulky water matchup, which is not a problem when you can just pivot into a Meganium. So Palafin welcomes in the bulky waters, can reliably flip turn away from those if I want to, bring in Mega Meganium, and now Mega Meganium's doing what it wants with Solar Beams or Weather Balls if it's expecting the water to switch out, things like that. So it creates good opportunities for Mega Meganium, but Palafin obviously in its own right doesn't need a ton of support. It's just a really dangerous Pokemon, really strong attack stat of like 160, really good speed stat of 100, great water stab options, good variety with setup. You have some bulk up sets, you have Encore or Taunt sets if you need to shut down some defensive Pokemon. So Palafin does just fine on its own, but when paired alongside Mega Meganium, I think it synergizes well with both of them, where he can pivot out of those bad matchups against the waters really easily, and obviously Mega Meganium can abuse that. Mega Meganium has a bit of a retreat from some of the fire and steel and ice problems that she has, and can get safely into Palafin, who can absorb most of those fairly well, and again force those Pokemon out and continue to create new opportunities with Mega Meganium or others. Obviously, helmets will be the big issue as well for Palafin, just because he tends to get chunked down by those pretty quickly, since he doesn't have reliable recovery, with Drain Punch really being his only way to get back to health. So, and Wave Crash also inflicting damage upon himself. So he's here for a good time, not a long time, if I'm using him as that nuclear option with like a band or something like that. So I just need to be careful on how I navigate the rapidly dropping HP. So next up, to continue to kind of synergize with that and give more powerful opportunity, to give me a more proper defensive retreat, especially when we're talking poison. It is not named Victini. Let me tell you that right now. His name is... oh my god. I have forgotten his name because his name is Archaludon. Nope. I don't know what happened there. Archaludon is kind of my jack of all trades Pokemon. Great defensively, really good switch out for uh, poison that might be threatening me. Really good switch out for flying since, again, Mega Meganium doesn't like that typing. Does really well with rock since neither of those resist that. But obviously, he has a lot he can do offensively as well. He can be a great defensive Pokemon. Has really good HP stat, or really solid HP stat, really great defensive stat. Special defense can be better than expected if you run AVs or things like that. So he has a way to kind of withstand and handle a lot of things. And then he can pressure pretty well a lot of other Pokemon since his move pool is really quite varied. He can go physical with the body presses. He can lean into his special stab with Draco Meteors or Flash Cannons. When we start talking about another edition in a minute, he has access to some pretty good electric moves. He can simply be a stealth rocker early game. He has good T-wave spam. So he can do a lot based on the matchup. If I need to control speed, he's a great option. If I need to withstand physical presences, he's a great option because the stamina starts to stack really well, especially if he's a leftovers or something like that. So he starts to get really bulky and regenerate health, and he can pressure really well back. So he gives me a lot to work with matchup by matchup. He can really kind of be that jack of all trades, do whatever I need him to do. Just getting to make sure I find the right set so that it fits well. But I think he synergizes pretty well with Palafin and Mega Meganium. He doesn't create any unwanted weaknesses. The only real knock on him is that he doesn't offer that ice resist that you want Steels to generally offer, and it puts a little more pressure on Palafin to handle some of that. And especially if we start talking freeze dries, and it really can start to stack up, and I might be under some pressure there. But generally speaking, he does a really good job of offering whatever utility I need from him in a matchup. So I'm excited about that. And then I guess we should get to the kind of the final piece of this mini rain core I've been hinting at. And so it's Pelipper. For obvious reasons, he has the drizzle ability. He's going to be able to bring that rain, do some defensive rolls if I want him to. U-turn, hurricanes, scald, weather ball, surf, whatever I want it to be. Ice beam, knockoff is pretty helpful as well. Sometimes toxic can be valuable. But the thing with this core, and I really want to highlight it now, is that it's not a full commit rain. Certainly these Pelipper in the first three can abuse rain. Archaludon has Electro Shot to take advantage of the rain and get a boost to its special attack while hitting with a really powerful electric move. Palafin and Rain quicking Wave Crash with a Choice Band is going to nuke just about anything. And then Rain doesn't bother Meganium in the slightest because the ability ignores Rain for Solar Beam, Weather Ball, and Synthesis calculations. So she gets the benefit of a reduction in fire damage if she has to take some of that without losing any of her firepower. So all four of these really do synergize well with the Rain. But I wouldn't say this is a Rain team. I wouldn't say Pelipper is a mandatory bring every week. But it gives me that Rain option where Pelipper can come to matchups, be probably a bulky defensive piece that it tends to be, and enable the other three to be more offensive oriented pieces that can take advantage of their boosts in rain or their disregard for rain when we're talking about Mega Meganium. So I think those all synergize really well together. Palafin and Pelipper both offer momentum to create opportunities for Mega Meganium. Pelipper's likely to bring in electric Pokemon, and so if a slow U-turn out on those switch-ins can give Mega Meganium a free turn. She has Earth Power for the electrics if they're not able to resist that, or just Solar Beam spam because that is a really dangerous move. So I'm excited about Pelipper. I think Rain synergizes well with Mega Meganium, but I didn't make a huge commitment here. I don't feel I need to bring this even to half the games, but it's enough to put a lot of pressure on opponents for prep that they have to be able to answer our rain mode if I go to that. So we'll talk about the rest of the team. That's really the core four for Rain. Nothing else really synergizes with Rain in that way. But it doesn't say, it's not to say that they are struggling in a rain mode either. So the next up is Regieleki, who I've brought before. Fun Pokemon. He's got great speed. Obviously, the ability's great. He can function both physically and uh, special attack versions. Supercell Slam was a really great addition for him, so he can go either way depending on the matchup. And so the fun thing about Regieleki here is that he doesn't need rain to do what he does. Obviously, additional damage from Thunder is great in rain, but it's not a must. But what he does and what really synergizes in a fun way with the rain core, if I go that mode, is that he forces a ground bring by the opponents. Because if you don't bring a ground Pokemon to a Regieleki matchup, you're just asking for trouble. And so it forces opponents to bring a really, really bad typing to a matchup they don't have any value in. So if I don't bring Regieleki, and Regieleki is definitely not coming to every game this season, just no way that would make any sense. I'm going to have some really bad matchups against some ground types that are just too easily enabled to wall it out Regieleki, and I may not want to deal with that. But what Regieleki does for me is it forces opponents into a bind in prep. Do they bring a ground type because they have to that is potentially going to have very little value if it's trying to deal with a Palafan, a Mega Meganium, and a Pelipper, and then finding themselves with a pretty useless Pokemon at Team Preview that isn't going to offer much other than early sacrificial fodder? Or do they leave it behind and hope I don't bring Regieleki, and if they guess wrong, then all of a sudden Regieleki is probably leading off for me, probably spamming around electric moves, creating Volt Switch opportunities to bring a Mega Meganium in case they do have like Grass Resist or an Electric Resist or something like that, or a Dragon Resist. All three of those resists Mega Meganium very easily hits for super effective damage. So it puts opponents in a really awkward spot, and that's kind of why I like Regieleki here. But again, it's not a rain Pokemon. It's just something that I think synergizes well with that little rain core. Obviously, ground types will shut them down, so it's just about forcing opponents into those decisions in team prep, and I think that'll be fun for me as I kind of feel that out this season. So next up is Nihilego, who does have access to Thunder, so there is some little bits I can do in the rain for just that extra little power electric move, especially if we're having to deal with steel types. That Thunder damage might be enough to help get Nihilego through a couple of bulkier steels that don't have the ability to resist that electric move. So maybe something like an Apollyon where would have handled Nihilego before, probably isn't doing so well against like a Thunder spam. And so I think Nihilego does also function to a degree in rain, but again, that's really tangential, not super mandatory for how I intend to use it. Nihilego is, like a lot of the higher tiered Ultra Beasts, a danger to sweep in any matchup. If the Steel type goes down early or mid game, Nihilego can always be just a Meteor Beam away from sweeping when they don't have that defensive switch in. He has access to Grass Knot, so the ground types aren't a great answer generally, especially because a lot of them tend to be bulkier. You think like a Swampert or a Rhyperior or even like a Great Tusk. None of them are particularly enjoying Grass Knots, and so it limits their options to be good answers to that. And so the Steels, again, become a mandatory bring for opponents sometimes because they have to have a way to deal with Nihilego. And so that can, again, force opponents into a bind. They're already looking at, do I have to bring a ground type to this matchup, even though it could be a negative? Do I have to bring a steel type to this matchup, even though I don't want to? It's not a great steel. Steel isn't really helping me deal with the rain. Steel isn't really helping me deal with Mega Meganium, who has access to Weather Ball and Earth Power. So that's already two types that our opponents are feeling obligated to consider bringing, even if their overall matchup outside of that one Pokemon isn't great. And so that's kind of where I like Nihilego here as well, because Nihilego is one of those, like Regieleki, if you don't have an answer to it, you can be at a loss in Team Preview because you let this thing get going with a Meteor Beam or just, it was a choice lock set, so like a Choice Scarf that boosts special attack on KOs, and it's just steamrolling if it can get the Power Gems or the Sludge Bombs going, or Sludge Waves, I should say. And so that's kind of where I like Nihilego here. But then I do think that it has another value to my team overall, and we'll kind of get into that more as we're going along. It's a really solid special defensive option, really good AV user, especially when we're talking Fairy, who thus far I don't have any resists for. Nihiligo being the first resist and being a really good HP stat, really good special defense. You slap an AV on that, all of a sudden you're tanking fairy attacks for days, and not a lot of fairies have great ground coverage to pressure it out with. Maybe some have access to Shy Shock or a steel move, but not a lot of them have access to ground or a good useful ground attack. So Nihiligo can also be a really useful fairy counter for a couple of the more problematic fairy matchups. Think like a Mega Floette or Mega Clefable or some of the other higher powered fairies that are up there that may not have that coverage to pressure it. So obviously it's got its physical defensive issues. It doesn't want to be touched by ground attacks, but it offers a lot to the team as just a general pressure piece for sweep potential, and then also some synergy with Rain, although really, again, tangential. Speaking of problems with steel types, though, I did have a solution to that I was excited to pick up here. So Dugtrio is a niche Pokemon, really relies heavily on its ability and its ability to trap and lock things in. But I thought Dugtrio fit really well with a couple of the pieces on this team. So obviously Nihiligo has the issues with steals. Dugtrio has the ability to trap steals alongside all the other typings other than Ghost, and with access to it being a ground type and steel types not liking ground, it can really effectively trap, KO, and clear the way for Nihiligo. Alternatively, it can also be used as a good answer to the poison types that might otherwise be able to pressure out Meganium a little bit. You think of something like Galarian Slowking that can probably withstand all of those attacks, especially if built that way. But now all of a sudden Dugtrio can trap, KO it, and clear the way for Mega Meganium. Weakened ground types or ground types that have a secondary typing that doesn't like ground. So something like an Iron Treads or an Excadrill that could have easily walled out Regieleki all of a sudden can find themselves trapped and KO'd by Dugtrio, which again can clear the way. So I thought Dugtrio fit really well here. I have a few Pokemon that are really only one bad type matchup away from sweeping. And so I thought Dugtrio fits well in the plan of trying to clear those out, create opportunities for those other Pokemon to be enabled to sweep, and then also really restrict opponents' item choices as well. So, they may have wanted to carry a Rocky Helmet or leftovers or some kind of berry to help manage some of those breakers, but now they're being compelled to carry a Shed Shell to make room for Dugtrio to not trap and KO them. So I think Dugtrio fits well here, even just as a team build piece where opponents have to look at it and reconsider what they're going to do. Dugtrio also is not one of those Pokemon that's going to come to every matchup. It just doesn't work in every matchup, but you don't want to be caught in a Dugtrio matchup and not have solutions to it. So I thought it does a really good job of forcing, again, opponents to make choices in their counter prep, whether that's changing out the items they want to use or gambling on what I do and don't bring so that they hopefully don't run into a Dugtrio when they have a poison type they really need or a steel type they really need to service a matchup. So I think Dugtrio fits here. It obviously offers a good speed tier and then offers a really good role on what I'm trying to do, because I just have one or two types that really hinder some of my sweepers, and so Dugtrio does a pretty good job of pressuring those ones well. Moltres is kind of my traditional bulky flying. Again, I was very clear on this earlier. I don't see myself being a 9 weeks of rain team. And so Pelipper isn't going to come to every matchups, but I really do like the bulky flying role, and Pelipper isn't always the best answer for that. Sometimes you have opponents that have a good grass type, and now your flying type isn't doing the resisting that it's supposed to be doing. And so just having something a little more traditionally bulky, a little better of a speed tier, a little better of an offensive presence, I thought Moltres was better suited for that role. A Pokemon I also end up drafting in this league quite a bit for some reason. I don't really draft it elsewhere, but it seems to find its way on my teams here for whatever reason. And so I liked having Moltres here just because I need a solid fire. I felt a better flying. And then I wanted to make sure, obviously, I had that role better filled out so that Pelipper wasn't being abused by Volt Switches for instant KOs or just really easy easy special attacks that can really push through. Pelipper, despite its history as being a good bulk piece, doesn't have tremendous defensive stats. Even its HP is not that good, so it can't really tank the way you want a bulky flying to tank sometimes if it's not dealing with some of the typings it's really well suited for. But I think Moltres does a better job of that while also offering a good and more effective offensive presence. So I felt even though some of the rules are redundant between the two, that the matchup needs are entirely different. So if I'm not looking at running rain, I don't feel like I still need to bring Pelipper because I need flying. I can lean on Moltres in those matchups, and I thought I was able to save costs throughout the team to make that fit without finding myself stretched too thin on some of the other Pokemon. So I think Moltres will serve me well. Obviously, the biggest restriction with Moltres is that it so often is locked into heavy-duty boots just because it also wants to serve that bulky flying role of offering defog. So it may be trouble, and then obviously I'm going to struggle to bring Moltres to any sort of rain matchup, although I don't foresee that being an issue. I think in those matchups, Pelipper will be fine, but the inability for Moltres to exist in there is obviously a knock on the synergy I've been describing. So a bit of a hindrance for that, but otherwise I think Moltres will do what I want it to do. Next up is Obstagoon. So really, Obstagoon's kind of a more awkward one on my team, I'm not going to lie. He offers a really good speed tier, which was relevant to me. He offers a really critical answer to Ghost, since I had none, and then an additional answer to Dark, since only Mega Meganium was doing that role currently, and a lot of Dark types can slot poison moves, and so that isn't the best, most reliable answer. So Obstagoon was just offering some necessary coverage that my team was lacking to that point. Not to say that Obstagoon isn't a bad Pokemon or that it can't do what I want it to do. It just doesn't necessarily fit alongside any other mode. It's more of an independent piece that just pressures really well. Guts boosted, Facade is going to wreck for damage every time it gets the chance. Knockoff spam is actually quite helpful. That's a really useful move for my team just because I expect to be dealing with some shed shells or some rocky helmets, and so being able to clear those out of the way with Obstagoon will be of value. And then the ability to parting shot and force or create opportunities for Meganium or others to come in on weekend Pokemon will be valuable as well, so that I can, fire off those high-powered attacks or set up win conditions like a Nihilego. So Obstagoon certainly has value. It doesn't lack synergy with what I've built so far. I don't see it necessarily being synergized with what everything else was. It just kind of fits a niche role in the team, which I felt was needed. And so I'm hoping to bring him to 2, 3, 4 matchups that make sense in the season. Certainly, if I run into like a Spectrier or some really dangerous ghost types, it'll be a more a higher consideration for those. But otherwise, I think he's just a good mon to fill out some missing pieces that were in the spots of the team so far. Next up is Slitherwing, who has very valuable priority. I don't have a ton of that right now outside of Palafin and Regieleki, but Regieleki really doesn't count for a speed tier. So having some useful priority with First Impression is really great. Having a really solid Scarfer I thought was also really great. My team lacked good options on the Scarf department. I think the only other solid options were, to this point, Palafin, who doesn't really like to run it that often since he has good priority anyway, and Pelipper, who is more of a niche, kind of like a surprise type of Scarfer, where if you're trying to catch someone off guard expecting bulk Pelipper and you get him with a Scarf, then it can be really dangerous for that matchup. But by and large, neither of them are loving that Scarf, so getting it with Slitherwing I thought was really helpful just because 82 is a really good speed tier for Scarf. It has Momentum Stab with U-Turn, has Close Combat, has First Impression, Earthquake, Flare Blitz if I'm not running a rain mode and bringing it. So I felt it kind of fit that team role well. And then with the option of running a bulkier if I need to, access to Morning Sun, again if I'm not running a rain mode, decent HP alongside pretty solid special defense gives it a niche special defensive role in my team because, again, I really haven't had a ton of great options on that front throughout this draft. Moltres and Mega Meganium and Heligo really are the only options, and none of them are wanting to do that role every week. That's more of a situational role. So just having another situational option I felt was helpful. It's not going to break through flying types, so that's not necessarily a problem. It can create opportunities for safe entry for Nihiligo to come in, or for Palafin to come in, or a Regieleki to come in with its clicking U-turn on those predictive switch-ins. So it can certainly navigate that without too much trouble, but obviously the flying typing is going to cause some problems for Slitherwing's ability to pressure out for damage. But really what I value with Slitherwing is that as a Scarfer or as a maybe a banded first impression user, it does help me stop a lot of potential sweepers before they get rolling too hard. So I can have a good way of forcing a lot of those out, since it is not likely they're going to run Protect to prevent Slitherwing from getting them. It's just a really hard move for anyone to slot in a draft format. So it should help Slitherwing just help keep the game in control in some situations where I feel like it could get out of hand. So, thinking like a Roaring Moon that's taking off, first impression that away, or maybe a Delphox that has gotten boosted up, a Mega Delphox, since that's a real danger now. It's not going to have any good physical defense, and so first impressions can again help me get through some of that. So overall, I think it'll do well for the team. And then finally, the last Pokemon I have is Claydol, who is not a great Pokemon historically for clear and obvious reasons, but within the confines of this team, I thought it did actually fit what I needed it to do. Dugtrio is not a real ground type. Anyone that's ever used Dugtrio will tell you never can switch that thing in on anything, so electric types can largely have their way even if Dugtrio exists. So having a real answer to electric felt nice in case there were some really bad electric type matchups. Maybe a Zeraora matchup where Dugtrio wasn't even going to outspeed that and was going to die to a knockoff anyway. Claydol might be a better solution to some of that. Or if I just needed a better spinner for a matchup, I couldn't use it for my flying types. Regieleki wasn't going to come. I can still slot a spinner here. Or if I needed someone else to be a stealth rocker, or a bulk piece, or a slow pivoter to create opportunities for Mega Meganium or trap with Dugtrio, Claydol can do all that. None of it can do exceptionally well, but it has the options to do all of that. And then in the right matchups, I think it can take advantage of the moment and create some great opportunities for Dugtrio to trap, or Mega Meganium to get a free turn to click whatever it wants. Same for Palafin. So I think it can do things well within the confines of this team. It's just not a Pokemon that wants to be on the field for more than 1 or 2 turns, because it just opens up a lot for the opponent. It's pretty passive. It isn't going to deal out a lot of damage. It is pretty vulnerable to a lot of types that are pretty common, especially pivoting moves. You can flip turn, U-turn. Doesn't like knockoff, doesn't like water, doesn't like ice. So it has a lot of problems defensively, but for a couple of matchups where electric is a real concern or ground is a real concern, since a lot of ground types also have access to rock moves, and some Moltres can find itself in trouble pretty quickly, Claydol can be a good solution. So maybe once or twice this season Claydol will make an appearance, but I felt it did have a role within the team just because Dugtrio was not doing that role as a ground type. It was doing it as a trapper. So that's the team overall. Speed tiers are really good. Regieleki with his 200 is great, not really relevant. I got the 120, 103, 100, 95, 90, 85, 81. Oh, 81 was Slitherwings. 80, 75, 65. So no gap larger than 15 or 17, but that 120 to 103 is largely irrelevant. I don't think there's any real 118s or 119s running around that we're going to take huge advantage of that. Maybe, I can't remember if Cinderace is 119. I think he is actually. So maybe Cinderace or Roaring Moon might be a little more enabled to run Adamant, but Adamant Cinderace isn't really going to be breaking through Moltres anyway, so that's not a huge concern. Roaring Moon obviously has a little bit more of a danger, but outside of that 1 or 2 situational Pokemon, there's no real speed gaps that are going to cause concern, so I'm really happy with that. The type chart I've kind of alluded to, there are a few gaps in it. The Fairy one I don't consider overly problematic. Moltres and Nihilego offer really strong fairy resists, and Slitherwing and Obstagoon are more situational presences anyway, so it's unlikely I'm going to have a fairy problem in any given matchup, just that I don't have the easiest fairy solutions could show up as an issue down the road. Ghost, again, that's more from a spamming point of view. I'm not going to love Shadow Ball spam probably this season, just given the nature of Obstagoon not wanting to come to a ton of matchups. I may be relying on AV Nihilego more than I would like just to help absorb some of those neutral attacks. Ice will probably cause some trouble this season. My only resist being Palafin obviously creates problems. I don't feel the pressure as much on the physical side. Moltres, I think, will be a generally good answer to most ice types that aren't named Mamoswine. Pelipper, again, will be a pretty good answer to most ice types most physical ice types. And then even Duraludon, since it gets the stamina, it starts stacking up with the defensive boost, so it can withstand ice spam pretty well. It's just when we start getting into the freeze dry spammers, I think that's going to cause issue. And for some probably more peculiar builds with Slitherwing or Nihilego or maybe even Moltres to help kind of navigate that. But that's a case-by-case basis. There's only 2 or 3 teams that I think are positioned to cause that kind of pressure. And then water is a bit of a concern, but not a huge one. I think my real consistent pieces of Mega Meganium and Palafin are going to be there almost every week, and they're going to be resisting water almost every week. Archaludon's probably going to have a consistent presence as well. So that's 3 solid resists week to week to week that I have. So I don't consider that water issue real, since Dugtrio and Claydol will never see the same matchup together. Moltres will come and go, and then obviously Nihilego will probably be a more consistent presence, but I think I have good solutions, so I'm not overly worried about that. So key moves, I got 4 rockers, great. In the way I'm envisioning my team, I don't see myself doing the slow whittling down, maybe some early rocks, and so having 4 good options to get some rocks out will be great, or a Toxic Spike if I feel like I can dominate the poison matchup and keep their poison at bay, or entirely absent from team preview. I think having access to Toxic Spikes is good. I would have liked to have regular spikes, but again, I don't think it's super mandatory with how I'm envisioning this play style of pivoting around, creating opportunities for the explosive players to hit hard. Getting an early stealth rocks out there will be great. I don't see myself spending 2 or 3 turns trying to hazard stack. I have some taunters. If you go farther down, you can see Palafin probably is the most likely to see consistent usage, but I don't really want to play that game of taunting out the defoggers. I don't think that's going to be very helpful. I don't have a ghost type anyway to stop the rapid spinning, so they're going to be able to spin whenever they want, so I'm not going to really fight the hazard stack game. I just want to make sure I can threaten it the way I need to. From a hazard maintenance point of view, I have 2 solid defoggers. I don't see a situation in which neither Pelipper nor Moltres is in a matchup. And even if they're not in a matchup, I should have at least Regieleki in a matchup. So there should be a solid hazard control option for every matchup. Most likely a flying type, but a couple of other options with Regieleki, or again, that Claydol matchup I was talking about, where maybe Claydol does make sense and it can be the spinner in that situation. Pivot's very strong. I got 7 pivoters overall. Parting shot through Obstagoon, Volt Switch with Regieleki, Flip Turn with Palafin, 3 U-turners with Slitherwing, Pelipper, and Moltres, and then a teleporter with Claydol if it ever comes. So that really enables me to get back to my original game plan of threatening hard with Mega Meganium, which was always the team goal. So I'm excited about having enough momentum to hopefully maximize her potency. Encore with Palafin I think is valuable for a couple of situations, primarily probably with Nihilego, but also maybe to get in Mega Meganium as well, just to get, again, those high-powered attacks. Some taunters to help with some of that. Knockoff with 4 of my Pokemon is also very useful, and that probably is a move that I could see Mega Meganium slotting in general, just to clear some items out of the way that may be causing problems for Palafin, or maybe preventing Dugtrio from trapping. Just having the option to knock those off I think will be of value, and I could see opportunities for Mega Meganium to slot it. Obstagoon will probably always slot it, and then again Nihilego can slot it for some matchups as well. And then a couple of a couple of status spammers is always good to have. Some Will-O-Wisp options, especially with Slitherwing, is nice because that can be a good option for some defensive game plans if I ever use Slitherwing that way. So it can be bulky and dealing out burns to the physical attackers. I can see it having value, and then Thunderwave is always useful for speed control, enabling Palafin a little more, maybe even giving Mega Meganium the speed it needs to get past a few things. So overall, I think I have the tools I need with the Pokemon I want to use, and I'm not really missing in any of those fronts. Like I said, Spikes is a bit of a miss, but I really wouldn't consider it a major problem for how I'm envisioning this team. So overall, my team threatens with, but is not reliant on rain. Like I said, I have a mini rain core, but I don't have a Swift Swimmer. So again, it's a very easy thing to not lean on in any given week. But I think I've shown that the synergy is there for it to be dangerous and force opponents into some uncomfortable counter prep. My speed tiers are good. I have very strong momentum, so my opponents aren't getting to take advantage of bad speed tiers to make extra bulky Pokemon. They're not going to be able to easily dominate field position. I have enough momentum to continue to maneuver how I like and try to create opportunities for my breakers. My offense, I think, is very synergized. I think I've been going over that. We got the rain. I've got, Pokemon like Regieleki that abuse opponents if they don't bring ground solutions. Ground solutions don't want to show up to rain. That's bad for them. I've got Nihilego for offensive sweeping. It doesn't like steals, but then I have Dugtrio for trapping. So I have ways of really pushing through some of the defensive pieces on my opponent's side and letting my offensive pieces shine. My defensive backbone, I think, is effective. I'm not going to call it stellar. I think I've pointed out where there are some potential gaps that could cause problems. But I think I have creative solutions available to me, whether that's Assault Vests on like Nihilego or Archaludon, whether that's running bulkier with some Pokemon that can run bulkier like Slitherwing, or Moltres or Pelipper or even Mega Meganium. I have the ability to answer most situations, but my team isn't built to be a defensive backbone. It's built to be resilient enough to enable the breakers and the power hitters to see the field frequently and dish out damage, and then probably play a trade-off game where I take an early 1 or 2 mon advantage, and then I just start strategically sacking to create more opportunities for my breakers to come back in and take more with them to the grave. And so I'm not built to last 60, 80, 100 turns. I don't see my team being that way, but my opponents need to do their best to not be down a mon or two after 10, 15 turns, because I think my team can play the trade-off game very well, and most opponents aren't going to want to be dealing with that. You bring your steel in to KO Meganium, and then now your steel's dead because Dugtrio comes in and cleans it up. So if I can play that kind of game, I think I'll do really well for myself this season. And overall, I think I'm pretty excited about this team. Most of these Pokemon I've used before. I think all of them I've used before, actually, outside of Claydol, and then obviously this is my first go-round with Mega Meganium. But overall, I think this is a really well synergized team, especially if the goal of the team is to optimize Mega Meganium's potential. I think the team does that, and so I'm excited to hopefully showcase that this season. So thank you all for hanging out with my very long team preview. I enjoyed talking with you. Take care. Hopefully I'll have some post-game or weekly matches to talk through. I'll see if I can find the time to talk through some of those for myself. So maybe stay tuned for that. But thanks everyone for hanging out.